I just finished Tears of the Kingdom, and I just did every single shrine in the game, but there's one question that I've had for the entirety of the game ever since the opening sequence of the game started, and that is, where exactly does it fit in the timeline? Because it doesn't make a lot of sense at the moment, and I'm sitting here scratching my head because I'm big into Zelda lore. I got all the fucking Zelda books, and you know I'm huge. It's, you know, like when it comes to Zelda lore, especially Zelda timeline, the interesting parts of it is mostly headcanon for absolutely everyone. The Zelda timeline could have always been one of the most interesting parts of the entire franchise, but it isn't. It's just it's a mess. It's a mess. But the fact that the fun thing about it being a mess is that after Tears of the Kingdom, it's even more of a mess. So now I want to explore a little bit and just raise some questions about what the fuck is going on. So the very first thing that I have a question about is the imprisoning war, because if we go by established lore, the imprisoning war is what happens in the defeat timeline after Ocarina of Time. And it's stated that it's 7 sages, that being after Ocarina of Time, so it's the 7 sages from Ocarina of Time that eventually seals Ganondorf, because it's in the defeat timeline. I have some you know some notes here. Like, look right here, right? The 7 sages, here's Ocarina of Time, heroes defeated, 7 sages seal Ganon, king of evil, in the imprisoning war. And then to go off of more of that, I have more, you know, imprisoning war right here. So, yeah, Ganondorf enters the sacred realm, known as the Golden Land, laid claim to the Triforce, becoming Ganon, the Demon King. Ganondorf's attainment of the Triforce tainted the Golden Land, transforming it into the Dark World. And that's sort of what I want to focus on, because the Dark World is how you sort of continue after Ocarina of Time in the hero is the downfall timeline, basically, right? That's if you go by the imprisoning war being Ganondorf obtaining the Triforce because Link died, because Ganondorf killed him, he then obtains the Triforce and creates the Dark Realm, which is now the Sacred Realm, but dark. And that is the whole premise of A Link to the Past, and also later on A Link Between Worlds, which is it comes right after, or not right after, but it's supposed to be a sequel to that. Now that's what we have, right? And now we go into Tears of the Kingdom's imprisoning war, right? And when we really think about it and have all the information, like if you didn't know what the imprisoning war from the actual Zelda lore actually was, and you just learn about all this shit now, you're probably thinking to yourself, that doesn't sound right. That's not what they told me in Tears of the Kingdom. And you'd be absolutely correct. It's not what they tell you about at all. So I think the only logical conclusion is that this has got to be a second imprisoning war we just don't know about yet. When does that take place? I don't know. But what I want to do, because we have never heard about another imprisoning war, we have never, you know, it's when Nintendo actually, this is all the way back in 2012 though, you know, the timeline hasn't really moved a lot since then. But if they actually went this far, and Nintendo never gives a shit about the timeline, you know, they never give a flying fuck, but if they go as far as to actually implement the imprisoning war in the timeline, it's a big deal, right? Because it's the events that you know, set off A Link to the Past and stuff. But so if we go by what we have as physical knowledge of the Zelda timeline, of the lore, and we don't go off of just, that doesn't make sense. If we're just gonna go off by what we know and what we're told and what potentially I think is happening, is that they just don't give a fuck. They don't give a fuck. I think Tears of the Kingdom's imprisoning war is the imprisoning war in the downfall timeline. They just don't give a fuck about the timeline anymore. So if we're gonna go by this, suddenly the imprisoning war is not about the 7 sages from Ocarina of Time imprisoning Ganondorf and creating, before he creates the Dark World. Like, he creates the Dark World, takes the Triforce, and the 7 sages says, so fuck that, fuck that, peace, right? Imprison. before he later reappears in Link to the Past. It's no longer about that. Now there's a completely new race called the Sonai, and you know how the Tears of the Kingdom story goes probably by now if you're even watching this video, because if you're watching this video and you don't know the story, stop watching because you're gonna spoil yourself, right? But now it's about a completely new race called the Sonai, and it's about Rauru that seals Ganondorf as a last-ditch effort because he's just too strong. And the problem about that being now the retconned imprisoning war is that this could potentially work, right? They could, because we don't know a lot about the imprisoning war. We don't, like what I told you about the imprisoning war. The 7 sages seal Ganondorf, and Ganondorf creates the Dark Realm. That's all we know. We've never had an official, like, you know, this is all the information, here's a book. You know, we don't know. We don't have a lot of details. So potentially it could make sense, right? The problem is that if Rauru seals Ganondorf like that, and if Ganondorf obtains, you know, the tear and becomes strong, but it has nothing to do with the Sacred Realm, suddenly the imprisoning war before A Link to the Past doesn't contain the Dark Realm. And if you don't have the Dark Realm in the imprisoning war before A Link to the Past, that means that A Link to the Past does not make a lot of sense anymore, right? Again, this is probably a different war, but there's one war already called the imprisoning war in the timeline. Why call it the exact fucking same? Why? If it's supposed to be something different, that's my one question. But you know why, right? And then another thing is if the Sonai founded Hyrule and also built Hyrule Castle, does that mean that Hyrule Castle was built twice? Because Hyrule Castle is founded by Hylians. And Hyrule is also found... Well, races already exist on Hyrule, but Hylians and Sky People don't exist on Hyrule after Skyward Sword, when they found Hyrule. so if the Sonai founded Hyrule and also built Hyrule Castle and existed in the castle, either they... Okay, let's think about it. Let's try to think about this rationally. So maybe number one, Tears of the Kingdom exists way before Skyward Sword. It's like the complete real beginning of the Zelda lore, not Skyward Sword anymore. And now suddenly maybe it makes sense that they founded Hyrule and also built the castle. But maybe if it's like 10k, 20k, 30k years ago, right? Before Skyward Sword or something, then it would kind of make sense that the castle would crumble and there would just be ruins left. Sonai ruins, right? Sonai ruins. So I guess, you know, right there. But then you consider that they met the Master Sword contains Fee and it's Fee. Fee. I say Fee. Who cares? Which means that it has to be after Skyward Sword. So suddenly that doesn't make sense because of that fact alone. Because Fee is the spirit of the Master Sword, but there's no indication that Fee, the spirit of the Master Sword, because I'm pretty sure, if I remember correctly, there is a first ancient hero that wielded the Master Sword even before Skyward Sword that they reference. They reference like the ancient hero in Skyward Sword, which means that there was a hero before Skyward Sword, and he used the ancient blade. But it is never stated that Fee was part of that. So if we go by what we know as a fact, and only what we know as a fact, because that's what I'm doing, I'm not, no headcanon, no theories or anything, You know, we're just gonna try to fit this in with official knowledge, okay? So then it doesn't make sense that it's before, because now you have Fee, and now it has to be after. So then the only other, well, there's two other. No, if we go by official knowledge, there's only one other option, and that has to be at the far end of the defeat timeline. Because again, it's the imprisoning war, right? I know that's also a thing, but because if they founded Hyrule many years before Skyward Sword, how that doesn't make sense. That Demise is in Skyward Sword, and it's the spirit that later on is released when Link raises the sword in Ocarina of Time, and then gives the power, because that releases the Sacred Realm to Ganondorf, right? Because he's sealed there, and that's what releases it, right? So that doesn't make sense, because he's the first hateful being. It's the start of like the Triforce quest, right? That's another thing. It can't be before because Fee, and it can't be before because the imprisoning war. Unless, again, there's another imprisoning war, but we've never been told about another imprisoning war. And and if they really wanted to make another war, I think a good choice would be to probably name it something else. Even though, yes, Rauru is definitely imprisoning him. You know, it could be called the sealing war, because he's sealing him. This you know, the imprisoning war is, you know what I mean? It doesn't make a lot of sense. But again, the other part could be that it's at the very end of the Heroes Defeated timeline, because they mentioned the imprisoning war, and then it has to be like 10,000s of years later after what is at the end again? It's the original Zelda game, isn't it? Let me double check. Original Zelda game. So it's like way after that. But then you have the problem with the imprisoning war again. And then you also have the problem with how can the Sonai found Hyrule when Hyrule is already established and founded throughout the entirety of the timeline, and the history of the entire land is already pretty clear. Like, it's how it could be so far into the future where history and everything. I'm really reaching here, I know. But if we're gonna try and make it make sense, it could be so far to the point where all of the history is lost. Hyrule Castle, founded by the Hylians, is completely crumbled to dust. There's no ruins, it's nothing. And then the Sonai comes down and is, because they are, the start of the game, we are told that they are the ancestors of the gods. Then they found Hyrule and build Hyrule Castle. So it's convenient how there was once upon a time a kingdom called Hyrule that had a Hyrule Castle, and then it's so long ago that it was lost to time, and it's completely erased from history. And then a new race descends from the gods, and then they found the land and call it Hyrule and build Hyrule Castle. Now that's a coincidence. So no, right before Skyward Sword doesn't make a lot of sense. After the defeat timeline at the end of it, and even before or after one of those, it has to be so many years apart from any of the games to make it make sense. But then even before, it references stuff that already happened between Zelda timelines. So before doesn't make sense, and after doesn't make sense either, because if they founded Hyrule and built Hyrule Castle, so is it in the middle somewhere? But that doesn't make sense either, because then Hyrule exists and is founded and have a king. in any part of the time. Well, maybe not in Wind Waker or the adult timeline, but I think we can probably X that one out. It's Tears of the Kingdom and Breath of the Wild is not part of that timeline because that timeline is flooded. Unless they find a new land, and they found the new land and call it Hyrule. No, it doesn't make sense. So at the end of all this, what is happening here? Well, what I think is happening here, because I remember clearly, as a one last tangent before I come to my own conclusion, is that I remember specifically that Anuma before Breath of the Wild, or was it after? Doesn't matter, but it was during Breath of the Wild, before we even knew about Tears of the Kingdom. He said in an interview that yes, Breath of the Wild exists in the official timeline, and it's pretty obvious. Yes, I remember now. It was before Breath of the Wild came out, and we were all like really like, oh shit, where does it belong in a timeline, right? And he said that it belongs to the timeline, and it's gonna be obvious to fans where it fits when you play it. And then we played it, and it still didn't make a lot of sense. We did what hints? What are you talking about? And then we played Tears of the Kingdom. We fired up, and within the first minutes, they're like bombshell us with the imprisoning war, and everybody's like, "Whoa, it's there! Oh shit!" And then we learned that the imprisoning war is not the same imprisoning war, or it is, and they retcon it. We don't know. We're not told. And to be honest, I don't even think they know. But here's what I think. I think the official Zelda timeline, even as it was created back in 2011 or 12, it came out with Skyward Sword. I think it was 2012. It's just a bunch of baloney. It's not real. It can't hurt you anymore. Let it go. We need to let it go. Now, to be fair though, right? Skyward Sword and Ocarina of Time, Majora's Mask, Twilight Princess, and from Ocarina of Time to the Wind Waker, and even from Ocarina of Time and to A Link to the Past, at least if we don't consider Tears of the Kingdom, makes sense. But there's Four Swords and Minish Cap after Skyward Swords, but before Ocarina of Time, Four Swords Adventure after Twilight. I'm not going to get into that because that's a whole nother thing, right? The Zelda timeline never made a lot of sense but it did if you kind of removed some games from it. Then suddenly, whoa, it does make sense. There's actually a lot of threads in the timeline that make sense, and it's really cool, you know? And the reason a lot of people love this timeline is because the connections between the games are really cool. Like, for example, the thing that was a fan theory for a long time about how did Link die in Majora's Mask, in the child timeline. You know, what happened to Link, and then you find the hero's shade in Twilight Princess, and then everybody was theorizing, and could that be the hero's shade? Could that be a Link? Could that be he became a Stalfos looking for Navi in the Lost Woods after Majora's Mask, and he turned to a Stalfos because he's not one of the children of the forest. He's not one of the Kokiri, and that was confirmed in Hyrule Historia. That yes, that's true. And those connections are the parts of the timeline that sort of make it special, right? That's like a perfect established line between one to the other, and even we see the hero of time right before us, because it's confirmed, right? But then in other games, it's more like they reference towns like Kakariko Village, stuff like that. They reference music, characters of ancestors of characters like Beetle and stuff like that. But as we've moved way past that, way past Skyward Sword, which was the first game of the timeline, and since this timeline was created, that is right here, ever since this timeline was created, it's just become more of a mess and more of a mess, more of a mess. And now with Tears of the Kingdom, this timeline is officially, completely and utterly dead. It can't hurt you anymore. You don't need to lose sleep over it anymore. And here's my my opinion, because again, there's no right or wrong answer here. We don't know. Will Nintendo ever address this? No, they won't. No, they won't. Of course they won't. Of course not. But I think Nintendo wants Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom to belong somewhere here, and I also think that I also think that Nintendo thinks that it makes sense that Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, especially now that they mention the imprisoning war, makes sense. But that's the thing with Nintendo design philosophy, that it's fun first, and story and detail and connections later, right? It's fun first, create a fun game, and then even if that fun removes or destroys some established lore, then so be it, because polish, and that's Nintendo's design philosophy. It's always been like that, and I think that's really good, because that's why the Zelda franchise is so critically acclaimed, if you will. It's, you know, one of the most popular franchises of all time. Why Tears of the Kingdom is as good as it is. But for us Zelda nerds out there that really care about this, you know, the connections between the games, suddenly you're a little confused. But yeah, I honestly, I do think that Nintendo is, I think they're putting it in the defeat timeline somewhere. I think this is where they're putting it. And they're just mentioning the imprisoning war, and they kind of retconning it again, because we don't have too much information about it, so kind of building upon it. The problem is that we have the solution of the imprisoning war, right? We have, or the resolution of the imprisoning war. The imprisoning war, and it's also stated that it's the 7 sages that sealed Ganon, and the 7 sages already existed, and they are the 7 sages from Ocarina of Time. And he also created the Dark World, which sets up A Link to the Past. So I think they sort of took that and was like, yeah, we haven't really talked about or touched that before. Let's take that and then just put it at the end, right? Imprisoning war. We never had a game about the imprisoning war. That was just some fucking lore we threw out, you know, just to make it little flair. Like, who knows who wrote that, right? Who gives a shit? Let's just put. I honestly think that Nintendo wants it to be here, and that is the only part that makes sense if we go by only knowledge that we have. I think that, but again, it doesn't make sense at all. But that's the only part that makes sense if you think about it from like Nintendo's perspective. Like imprisoning war. That's the only sort of thing we can go by now. Again, is it a different imprisoning war? Probably. Most likely. Hopefully, right? But we've never heard about another imprisoning war. And I would say that if you design something like that and you don't want to retcon something that already exists, because if it's every time Ganon is sealed, it's called the imprisoning war, then why have we only heard about one of them? Because Ganon has been sealed several times, but there's only been one imprisoning war. Now, but it's different it's different here though, because there's no link, right? So makes sense. Well, here, the adult time, like Ganon is sealed away, Hyrule is sealed and then flooded. There was no hero. So, Hyrule, right? That's what I mean, right? Here's an example right here. Ganon is sealed away. Why isn't this called the imprisoning war then, right? I guess there's no war, but he was sealed, right? But like, there's many cases where he's been sealed, and holy fuck, I'm rambling. But honestly, here's what I think they should do. I think that they should just fucking scratch the timeline, fuck it, and then you say that Breath of the Wild is just a game that takes reference from games that have already. Here's the timeline, and then separately, it's a different sort of universe. It's completely different, and it's just referencing, you know, games, and you know, because I think Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, they're just games to be good. They're just games to have fun with. Because if they cared about lore at all, they wouldn't have, like, you know, the links are all the different linked armors from several timelines. They wouldn't have, like, that's just a fun thing they add because it's fun, right? So, but that's the thing I mean, though, because I think it's kind of weird to half commit and then completely just fun the other. Like, you should either commit fully or don't, I feel like. But I think the only logical conclusion we can honestly make is that it doesn't take place in the timeline whatsoever. It's not there. It's in a separate universe. different Sacred Realm, different Triforce, different Hyrule, and in this Hyrule, the Sonai were the first, and not the Hylians or the Sky People from the Sky and Skyward Sword. In this universe, the Sonai were the first. And that's the only way, and that means that also the Imprisoning War is the only Imprisoning War that happened in that universe. And that's the only way I can make it make sense. I don't think that that's the answer Nintendo will have, but that's the answer I hope they will give, because that's the only way you can sort of, because I think it's kind of boring when a lot of people like myself care about stuff like this. The timeline I don't care about anymore, because it's just a bunch of it's just gibberish at this point, right? But the connections and the memories we have between like earlier games are cool, and they are there, and they made us go, whoa, shit, you know, and that was excited, you know, a new Zelda game. First of all, we're excited because polished Nintendo Zelda games, they're cool games. And then second of all, I and many other like myself are excited because, oh, where's this gonna fit in the timeline? Oh shit, how will this reference older games and stuff? But it's dead. It's dead, and now we could just let it rest in peace. It was good while it lasted. Hopefully Nintendo just says Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom is just a completely different universe. And I'm gonna end this video before I start ranting way more than I've already done. How long have I been recording? 26 minutes. Cool. Let's now do longer than that. But anyway, I love Zelda. Tears of the Kingdom is awesome, and I plan to probably make a pretty substantial review on it because I have many thoughts. Not going to talk about the timeline, just the game, because that would have probably been a 3-hour video. But Tears of the Kingdom, good game. I have 160 hours in it that I'm looking at in my Switch right now, and I just did all the shrines. I finished everything else, but I don't give a fuck about the Korok seeds. Anyway, cool, sick. Bye bye. Thanks for watching. Bye.